outside of the walls of this church that I'm living in the midst of the Twilight Zone, quite literally. Remember that series from decades past? I have in mind one particular episode of the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone was produced at the time when the main fear of our nation and the world was that we might destroy ourselves by nuclear weapons. And so the Twilight Zone often played on this fear, this underlying fear that many had. And in one episode, a man had prepared for this by building a bomb shelter in his basement. And he had equipped it and supplied it with everything that he needed to be able to not only survive the initial blast, but to remain as long as necessary in that bunker for any radiation to pass, up to years. And so the sirens sounded one day, and everybody panicked. The man ran down into his basement bunker and sealed himself in. And he survived. And he remained in there for years so that he would not succumb to the radiation of a nuclear explosion. And after about 10 years, he emerged from his bunker and he went up from his bunker only to discover that the bombs had never blown up. There had never been a nuclear attack. Everything was going on without him. He had forfeited, in effect, 10 years of his life needlessly out of hysteria. My friends, the world has lost its mind. But even more sadly, the church seems to have lost her soul. The institutional church. Never in my 60-plus years have I ever experienced what is going on around me in the world. And even if you are older than I am, I'm certain you can say the same. Never could we have imagined this, maybe even weeks ago. The world has gone crazy. And I could give a number of examples, but let me give one. And I'll use an acronym because I want to be delicate in the house of God. You know what the number one hard thing to find right now is because of hoarding? It's called TP. You cannot find TP. We have a parishioner whose job is supplying and selling TP. He can't even get TP. And for the life of me, I can't figure this out. Let me tell you this, folks, to put you at ease. You can survive without TP. And I know that from personal experience, from having lived for a full year, some 40 plus years ago, in a Middle Eastern country where there was no TP. And no one, so far as I know, died as a result. But that's an example of just how crazy it is and how the world has lost its mind. So never in my 60 plus years have I experienced anything like this, and I know you have not either. But you know what's even worse? Never in the nearly 2,000 years of the church have we ever experienced what is happening with regards to the church. Namely, the church has abandoned the flock, and even worse, isolated itself from the flock. And the church has gone the way of the world. The church has lost her soul. Let me give you some examples of what the church should be doing precisely now in the face of a crisis. Should be doing what the church has done in centuries past, even going back to ancient times. In ancient times, the world and nations and peoples often faced terrible plagues, which the death rate was sky high. And yet it's recorded, even in ancient times, in ancient Rome, before the church was even formally recognized and accepted by the empire. In times of plague, the pagans would hide in their homes and flee from the cities. Precisely what seems to be happening now. That's what the pagans did. But the Christians stood firm in faith. And they even reached out and went out and ministered to the sick and dying, including the pagans. And many of the pagans were so impressed by this faith and charity that some of them even became Christians themselves. We seem to be responding like the pagans. Run and hide, when we should be standing firm in faith and serving others in charity. Coast to coast and along the coasts, at a time when we should be standing firm in the faith and we most need God ourselves and the world needs it, and we should be on our knees, you can't even get into a church to go down on your knees. The churches are locked. Don't necessarily stop a virus from coming through those doors, and I don't promise that. Maybe God will protect us physically, but I promise spiritual, supernatural protection from the coronavirus and the craziness of the world inside these doors. You know, folks, we've heard talk about how pastors are supposed to have the smell of the sheep on them because they work so closely with them. How can a pastor smell like the sheep when he's locked the sheep out of the fold? One of the images that Jesus himself uses in St. John's Gospel is not only Good Shepherd, but sheep gate. And the images of that, of a sheepfold that has a wall of sorts with only one opening. And the shepherd would lay his body across that opening so that no sheep would leave and no wolves would come in. That's the sheep gate. Now instead, pastors are taking boulders and closing the opening with the sheep outside the fold. They're building walls to their own sheep. And rather than going out to the sick and dying, either out of fear or by law, the pastors can't even get into the field hospital, to use another image. Right now, I know of at least one of our parishioners who is dying, who was very recently put into hospice but still has days or weeks remaining. That family found out the day after that they are denied access to their beloved mother by that hospice facility. And I have been informed that I am not allowed to go in there and offer the last sacraments, even once that person is imminently close to death. Think of that. We've turned nursing homes and hospitals and hospices into prisons so that our own beloved will die in isolation. It's worse than the Twilight Zone. Jesus spoke about a house divided, and he was referring to the house or the kingdom of Satan. My friends, the institutional church has become a house divided, and that has been progressing for 6 decades.